My name is Eddie Maurice, and this is my wife, Jessica. Thank you for inviting us here to share our story and speak on an issue that has greatly affected us. We were invited here to speak because when two criminals came onto my rural property in February, I was the one arrested by the RCMP. My story received national attention after charges were laid against me for protecting myself, my young daughter, and my property. I was home alone with my 12-month-old daughter who was sleeping in her bedroom downstairs. When I was awoken from my sleep at about 5 a.m. by criminals outside my rural home, instantly I was terrified because when you live in the country like we do, your neighbors cannot hear you scream. It was pitch black outside and pitch black in the house, and I didn't know how many criminals there were, where they were, or what they wanted. I took my .22 rifle and went to the front door to confront and scare off the two criminals who were just 10 feet away. I yelled at them to leave and got no response from them. So I fired warning shots into the ground to scare them off. The two criminals ran back up our laneway to a van waiting on the road. I immediately called 911 to report what happened in hopes that the RCMP would catch them. I just wanted to protect my daughter who was sleeping downstairs. We live on the edge of our town of almost 30,000 people, just a 7-minute drive from our RCMP station. I waited anxiously for the police to arrive, fearful of who might still be out in the dark or if people might come back. 2 hours later, 3 RCMP cruisers officers came to my door with their assault rifles drawn to arrest me. They were telling me that I, the person who called 911 on the real criminals, was under arrest. It turned out that one of the criminals had been injured by a ricochet bullet, and the police were responding to the criminal's 911 call. I informed the officers that my daughter was still sleeping in her crib, and the RCMP arrested me, expecting me to leave her in her care, treating me like the criminal rather than the victim. At the time of my arrest, I was advised that I was being arrested for the criminal charge of careless use of a firearm. After being in custody for 24 hours, the RCMP laid 3 charges against me: careless use of a firearm, pointing a firearm, and the most serious charge of aggravated assault. Now, this is an important part of this story because this is where the RCMP made a mistake that was life-changing for our family. They laid the charges at about 7 a.m. Sunday morning and did not even begin physical investigation of the property or forensics until 9 a.m. Sunday morning. This means that the RCMP made a decision to lay 3 serious charges against me based solely on my 911 call, a statement that they coerced me into giving without my lawyer present, and a statement from the injured criminal. This criminal had admitted to doing drugs earlier in the night, found with methamphetamine on him, and had a criminal history. Our 2 statements were very different. The police had no physical evidence or any admission from myself on intending to injure this person. The RCMP had a choice at the time. They could and should have released me because I was a law-abiding, tax-paying citizen with no criminal record. And they could have investigated further, lay charges later if the evidence supported it. Instead, they chose to lay the charges without sufficient basis and hoped the evidence they later found would support them in those charges. I was presumed guilty first rather than innocent, which is not how our justice system was designed. The evidence didn't support the RCMP charges, and the preliminary ballistics report confirmed my statement, and the Crown withdrew the charges after 4 months of extreme stress, anxiety, fear on our family. This whole event was traumatic for me. Confronting these criminals outside my home gave me nightmares for a long lasting. They were dressed all in black, and in the dark you can't tell if they have weapons. Then to be arrested and charged like a criminal after calling 911 expecting help when I didn't do anything wrong and did what any other rural person would do in the same situation was devastating. I didn't ask for these criminals to come onto my property and force me to make a decision. I don't want anyone else to have to go through this same experience.
We became a focal point for people in rural communities across both Alberta and Canada, as many people identified with our situation and felt that they would have done the same thing in the same situation. At one local town hall meeting on rural crime, over 300 people stood and gave us an unexpected standing ovation as a show of support for Eddie's actions and our ongoing, very public legal battle. People rallied outside the courthouse at all 6 of Eddie's court appearances, with up to over 200 people at one, because they felt that there was a huge injustice being done to him. And we are here not only to speak about our experience, but on behalf of all of those who supported and spoke to us in the 8 months since Eddie's arrest. What many urban people don't realize is that for us, it's not just stuff we lose when things like this and crimes like this happen, but we also lose that feeling of safety and security that we all expect in our own homes. There is a feeling of being violated, a fear that the criminals might return to do more harm, and an ongoing anxiety that remains long after the stuff is gone. The crime rates in our area have more than tripled in the last 5 years, and the rural community is not only frustrated, but they're scared. Criminals aren't afraid to use violence and guns because they have nothing to lose. They know that the RCMP response times in rural areas are atrocious, and they use that to their advantage to commit more crimes. And now they're only becoming bolder, with crimes happening in broad daylight and even while people are home. People in rural communities, who are a large part of this great nation, are starting to become afraid of the RCMP too. And our situation is a good example of why. The RCMP have made it clear that if a citizen steps in to stop a crime in progress and protect themselves or their property, just as my husband did, they will be the ones on trial facing jail time. The RCMP are losing the trust of the people that they are supposed to protect. At the town halls we've been attending, people keep asking the RCMP, what are we supposed to do when a criminal comes onto our property? And the answer is always, go back in your house, find a safe room, call 911. But that answer isn't cutting it anymore. The police cannot be there. It is just not physically possible in the moment when a crime is happening, and this is evidenced by the alarming increase in rural crime. The RCMP are also telling us to put up gates across our driveways, to get security and camera systems, and to make our properties less attractive to criminals. Why is the onus being put on the property owners to protect themselves and make their properties less attractive to the criminals? This changes the feel of the community in rural areas, where we choose to live because of the privacy, peacefulness, and the openness of the community and neighbors. This whole ideology is thrown away when you have to turn your property into a fortress with gates and security cameras. We're tired of being told to stand down and being okay with being the victims. Canadians are strong and courageous people, and we expect to live freely and safely, and that's not happening. Hiring more police alone is not going to solve the issue of rural crime. We've got to take it a step further. If the government is not able to protect us, we need to be able to protect ourselves. Our recommendation is that this committee and the Government of Canada implement stronger self-defense and property defense laws so that the people can protect themselves without fear of prosecution. We urge you to consider significant changes to the laws to allow people to be their own first line of defense in crimes, just as we are in fire and health emergencies. While there seems to be a fear of gun in Canadian urban areas, this is not the case in rural Canada. We are raised and taught from a young age about guns, gun safety, and to be respectful with firearms. They are a necessary part of the rural lifestyle, to hunt for food and scare off or kill predators to keep our livestock safe. Firearms aren't the problem in Canada, our justice system is the problem. And our case is not an isolated incident. Gerald Stanley and Peter Cahill are also other victims that have gone through similar situations, and faith in our justice system in rural areas is quickly dying. If you don't do something to strengthen these laws for your rural communities soon, more people will stop calling the police. This is already happening. Rural citizens are starting to take justice and protection into their own hands without police involvement. They aren't reporting it, and you can be sure that the criminals aren't reporting it either. Until the criminals start to see that there are consequences to them committing these crimes in rural areas, they're going to keep coming and victimizing us. The fastest, cheapest way to change rural crime is not through policing or rehabilitation programs, but it is through allowing us to defend and protect ourselves and our property. Rural Canadians are not willing to sit back, and it's up to this committee to represent their wishes. We want to be able to protect ourselves and our property, and it's up to you to make sure that we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ms. Morris. With that, I'll call on Mr. Picard. 7 minutes, please.
Invite Julie to take my place first then. This is
Certainly.
first, I'm sorry.
Ms. DeBruzen.
Thank you. I'm going to start with the Morrises. Thank you for being here. And I was looking at what the order of reference is for this study, and it was to look at current rural crime rates, existing RCMP and other police resources, current partnerships, and possible recommendations. So I'm going to kind of focus on that a little bit. So looking at the existing police resources, one of the things that I've been looking at is the police resources in Canada study that was put out by Statistics Canada. And in their chart, I've mentioned this a few times, Alberta actually falls below the line as far as the number of police by population, so that in fact it has a lower rate than what would be the average across the country. I didn't know if you were aware of that or if you had any comments about the number of police available in Alberta to respond to crimes, urban or rural.
I don't think we have very many comments on the number of policing. We are just here to, what we're trying to get across to you is what people are communicating to us and the different types of stories and what the reality is for landowners.
I'm just saying, though, that one of the realities is that there are less police available in Alberta.
They've recently, I think in March or April, they've dedicated more funding to police in Alberta.
I'm not sure that actually increased the numbers. I'd have to look into that, but we have talked about the fact that there was $10 million given by the provincial government in Alberta. I think $8 million towards policing and $2 million towards justice, if I have that right, in the justice system. And they've changed a bit of how they do things locally based on that. If you look at Ontario and Quebec, there are provincial police, the OPP or Sûreté Québec. Is that something that you think would be helpful in Alberta, would be if the province had its own police service in addition to the existing services that you have, rather than relying solely on having your RCMP?
Yeah, we actually have the Alberta sheriffs, and we've heard some people recommend that they get more power to allow, because right now they're not allowed to help the police. They have certain jurisdictional issues, I believe, and so if they could improve the jurisdiction of the sheriffs to allow them to aid the police. Sometimes what will happen is the sheriff will be closer to wherever the incident is, but because of their jurisdiction, they cannot go to the crime that's in progress, so they have to wait for the RCMP who's further away. So I think that if there were some improvements made to that, it would be a big help.
So that's one thing that we could look at, is the availability of provincial police forces.
But the reality is the police still can't get there in the 15 seconds when they're breaking in your door, like in this example. It sounds like they may be in town in Manitoba, but when you're half an hour out from town, the police are still not going to get there, regardless of whether it's a provincial or a federal police service.
I'm just trying to get to, because a lot of what we're hearing about right now is from Alberta. And I understand that we have you two, and I'm sorry, I'm not ignoring you on the video conference, but from Manitoba. But what we've heard from is a lot of people in Alberta, and there is this differential in the amount of police services available. So that is, one thing that we're looking at as part of this equation. Solutions. I'm really interested in this. So your suggested solution then, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I want to try and understand this, is better self-defense, meaning that you, and presumably because we create laws for the entire country, could have to use a gun to defend my property, and just how do you frame that so I can understand?
I think that this actually does affect urban people, so I'm glad you brought this up, because a weapon can be anything, so it doesn't have to be a gun. It could be a baseball bat, it could be a frying pan that you hit somebody over the head with, and it has happened in urban areas, but probably isn't reported as much, that if you use too much force with any kind of weapon, whether it's a gun or not, you could still be charged with assault, even in an urban area with self-defense. So I think that it affects everybody in Canada, not just rural areas, to strengthen these laws. So if you had an intruder in your home and you...
Well, I guess I'm trying to figure out what the changes that you're trying to suggest, because we do have we have self-defense. We do have self-defense as a defense. There is within our criminal court system a self-defense aspect to it. There's a proportionality piece to it, but there is self-defense already built into our system. So I'm trying to figure out what change you're trying to ask us to do to that.
So when we went to the rural crime meetings, a lot of people were asking that question, what can we do? And the police didn't have an answer. So in our experience with our very expensive legal defense lawyer, the police are not giving people the appropriate answers as to what they can and can't do. So people in rural areas are asking for clarity on what that actually means. Because like in our case, you get prosecuted. And so should we always have to defend that we were protecting ourselves and have to spend thousands of dollars on legal bills when we are protecting ourselves?
But what I'm trying to figure out, because I was just quickly looking through some articles, and what it said is that there were people rummaging in a car.
Yeah,
They-
10
they
feet
were
from our
not-
door.
No, sorry, I'm just saying. And then somebody left your property with a shot, like a gunshot. So I'm trying to figure out in this, how would you change our self-defense laws? Because if you looked at a crime severity, presumably a gunshot wound is more severe than property crime, like overall. So I'm just trying to see where you're.
Well, so here's the thing. You don't know what they're there for in the middle of the night. And they were 10 feet from our door. Who knows if there was like 5 other people surrounding our house?
Yeah, but how would you change the laws? So
Oh,
then the police
okay.
come and they investigate. What would they change in what would you have us legally change in the law to change how the self-defense laws, and how that defense works?
I think
once you're in
that one of the
situation?
things that needs to be done is a review of the RCMP policies and procedures and how they handle situations like this. I think that the landowners and people protecting themselves in similar situations should be presumed innocent, not guilty first. And that in this case, they jumped the gun because it was 2 weeks after the Gerald Stanley case.
But when you look at the presumption, that's exactly why the charges were dismissed. I mean, it actually is the way that the
Yes, they
justice
were
system
dis-
works. But I'm just trying to figure out, 'cause if we were going to try and change the self-defense law, which is what you're asking us to suggest, and you want us to change somehow then the proportionality equation, how would you weight that? How would we weight it so that somebody would be able to presumably shoot in the direction of at someone who has come onto their property?
Unfortunately, that's run our time. I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to work that response back into another question. With that, we're Ms. Stubbs, 7 minutes, please.
Given that conversation, here's what I would suggest to my colleague who is in the government, and the Liberals have the ability to do this. It should be incumbent upon the Liberals in particular, and every one of us who is elected, to ensure the safety and security of the people who we represent, to give them the answers about how exactly it is we are going to ensure that people who are forced into this position against their will, because they have no other options, will not be re-victimized and criminalized. So let me suggest to this committee that this is an area that should be folded into the recommendations. And frankly, it's your job and ours to figure out how exactly they answer that question, not to people who have been victimized by criminals who have broken into their property. So for my first, I would like to thank the people from Thompson, Manitoba and the Maurices for sharing your time here today. I wish, frankly, that an entire hour was dedicated to each of your testimonies, but time is what it is. Eddie and Jessica, I wonder now, would you do anything differently?
I would not call the RCMP if I was to do it differently. That is why I was prosecuted. The criminals that came onto my property were on drugs. They didn't know where they were. In their statements, they couldn't even locate us at all. I wouldn't have to go through what I had to go through if I didn't call for help. And the police didn't come for 2 hours anyways. So really, there was no point of calling.
And so given that this is an issue that involves all 3 levels of government working together, I think on that instance, the point that Jessica made, and in response to your answer, it is then the job of the Liberals to review the policies, the procedures of the RCMP, and it's their responsibility to take action on ensuring accountability, and that the RCMP both is giving accurate information and able to serve and protect the communities. I'm sure that RCMP officers want that too, because you should never hear from a rural resident or any Canadian anywhere in this country that they feel that they wouldn't call the RCMP to come and protect them because they might not get help. Can you tell me both how this ordeal has impacted your family, and then also what the overall feeling is in rural Alberta about the crime problem?
In terms of how the whole ordeal has impacted us, obviously it was incredibly stressful, the whole 4 months of the court process. Eddie had nightmares after this incident happened, and now we have to lock our doors all the time if we're not in the same room as the door that we're in. And we always have a fear of people coming back. So every time there's a car that we don't recognize on our street, we're wondering if they're scoping our place out or if they're going to come back later that night, because in this particular instance, we believe that they had scoped our property out because I was out of town and one of the vehicles was gone. So they've been watching our place for how many days, like, who knows. I had to take a bunch...
Go ahead.
I had to take time off work because I couldn't handle the stress of everything, and Eddie ended up quitting his job afterwards because the stress just got to be too much.
And really, the overall feel in Alberta is basically people aren't going to call. They'd rather call their neighbors. They're setting up plans to deal with it themselves. People are basically saying they're just going to shoot, shovel, and shut up from now on. And they don't want to be the next Eddie Maurice.
And guaranteed, there is no law-abiding rural citizen in this country who wants to feel like that or be put in this situation. You know, our witnesses here from Thompson, Manitoba, they mentioned the impact on kids and on their family. Do you have any comment on the impact of your kids or your concerns about the future?
Oh,
Your-
when we were going through the whole court battle and everything, we had to have conversations that no family ever had to have of, what if I do have to go to jail? What will happen? We'll have to sell our property. What will we tell our kids? These are conversations that we had to put up with, that we had to have privately while going through the whole court process.
Yeah, and then in terms of the impact on our kids, so we have a now 5-year-old, she was 4 at the time, and our youngest daughter is just over 18 months, so she was about a year when this happened. And they could feel the stress that we were feeling, right? So they had to spend a lot of time with our grandparents because we were doing lawyer meetings, and there were times like I couldn't even cope with parenting, and I had to call my mom to come and get the kids because they throw tantrums when they're stressed out, just like when they're feeling things. So yeah, it affected them as well.
Right, so everything quite clearly didn't just work out because the charges were dropped. So do you have any sense of what happened with the criminals related to the crimes at your home?
Yeah, well, we're not so sure about the one woman who was charged, but the male, his name was Ryan Watson, so he was injured with a pretty serious injury from the ricochet, and 5 weeks later he was found in a stolen vehicle with break-in tools and charged again. At this point, I don't believe that they've really spent much time in incarceration. They were just let out, awaiting trial, I guess. They were also just charged with basically summary offenses, trespassing at night and mischief at night, I believe it was.
And theft under $5,000. And basically, in the past, when he was on our property, that was his 3rd time being arrested. He was arrested four times in a matter of 6 months for all the same.
So when people say there's a revolving door of criminals and the rights of criminals come before the rights of law-abiding citizens and victims of crime, that's what they mean.
Absolutely.
And are you convinced, and are your neighbors and your friends in the community around you convinced that crime rates have actually dropped in Alberta and in rural communities?
No, we hear about crimes every day. We hear about crimes every day, and I just don't know if people are reporting it as much. Actually, in Turner Valley, which is a neighboring area of ours, or the detachment from Turner Valley, in the last 6 months, crimes have gone up instead of down. So I think people just aren't calling as much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks all of you for being here today.